The Norwegian Refugee Council is warning that any attempt by Israel to permanently displace Palestinians within or from Gaza would amount to a breach of international law. The Israeli army's expanding ground offensive is forcing hundreds of thousands of Palestinians even further south and worsening an already dire humanitarian situation. According to the UN, 1.9 million Palestinians, more than 80% of the population, have been forced from their homes by Israeli attacks or evacuation orders. It says Israel's indiscriminate bombardment has damaged more than 250,000 housing units and completely destroyed a further 55,000, making them uninhabitable. It also says more than 1 million Palestinians have no safe or secure home to return to. Aid workers are battling to reach those in need because of ongoing Israeli attacks. They say the only way to deliver humanitarian aid is a sustainable ceasefire. Ahmed Bayram is Middle East advisor for the Norwegian Refugee Council. He joins us live now from Amman. Thanks very much for being with us. So talk to us, first of all, about some of the challenges that your team have faced there in particular, and as we mentioned, how difficult it is for the groups that are working there to deliver any aid when there is a conflict going on.
Yes, of course. 50 of my colleagues have been pushed all the way down south to Rafah, which is now one of the most populated, most densely populated areas in Gaza. We're talking about 12,000 people per square kilometer. It's almost impossible to operate and satisfy the immense needs, to meet the immense needs of the populations there. My team tells us. Our team tells us that there are people who have to go days without a meal. They themselves, our teams, have been displaced repeatedly, at times with their extended families. They have to build tents and stay in tents that can hardly shelter people from the worsening weather conditions, the increasingly desperate situation. Of course, all of this with almost complete siege. No food, no enough food that is allowed in, not enough clean drinking water. And of course, the displacement that continues to increase with Israel creeping closer, Israeli tanks creeping closer to the south.
And as you know, the UN Security Council passed this resolution last week calling for more humanitarian aid to be brought into the Gaza Strip, but no ceasefire. Have you noticed any increase at all in humanitarian shipments since that time? Has that made a difference at all?
It is very hard to tell. I mean, what we have been saying here is that the amount, we shouldn't be preoccupied with counting numbers of ships and shipments and aid trucks. What we need to see is difference on the ground, and so far that has not been achieved. There are people that are still hungry, actually starving. We're on the verge of famine for 500,000 people. At the same time, desperation means that people are not getting enough, aid, and that includes water as well. The situation on the ground is desperate in the sense that people who are being pushed to the south have nowhere to go, have nowhere to stay. So while this has been a step in the right direction, we need a giant stride here, and we need countries to come together to agree as to a ceasefire, a lasting ceasefire. What is happening on the opposite is more pushing of people towards the south, and hence our warnings that, it is alarming how Palestinians are being pushed and are being asked to leave their homes constantly and repeatedly, and that is a violation of international law.
And just briefly, you mentioned in the release that's been provided to us about the fear of people Palestinians being pushed into Egypt. How real is that possibility right now?
When you think of the plans that have been endorsed by the Ministry of Intelligence in Israel, when you hear the rhetoric by the Prime Minister and his senior ministers and officials, we have every reason to worry. It is already happening that people are being pushed without any prospect of going back home. And now we fear that they will be pushed over the border, as it seems that there are, the Israelis are thinking of that concretely. They are already discussing that plan. And we have made it clear that this would constitute an atrocity crime, which means that it could be either a war crime or a crime against humanity. And this is why it is contingent on world powers to stop that from happening, to stop that nightmare scenario from happening. What we need is exactly the opposite, for people to be able to go back home safely and to be with their families and not to be pushed over the border against their will.
Appreciate your time, Ahmed Bayram from the Norwegian Refugee Council.